The yellow cab screeched to a halt, tires smoking, right in front of the towering glass behemoth that was the Empire State Building. I leaped out, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. New York. Finally. My 21st birthday present, a whirlwind trip to the city that never sleeps, courtesy of my eccentric Aunt Millie. She'd always said, life's too short for sensible shoes and sensible parties, and this trip was proof. My itinerary was packed tighter than a sardine can: Broadway shows, museum hopping, Central Park picnics, and the grand finale, a surprise birthday bash at a secret location. I checked into the swanky hotel Aunt Millie had booked, a penthouse suite overlooking Central Park. The view was breathtaking, a sprawling tapestry of green and concrete. I barely had time to unpack before my phone buzzed. Meet me at the Met steps in an hour. Dress to impress. Your adventure begins now. The text from Aunt Millie read. An hour later, I stood on the grand steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, feeling like Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. A limo pulled up, and a dapper chauffeur opened the door. Miss, my name? Your party awaits. The limo whisked me through the dazzling city streets, past flashing billboards and bustling crowds. I felt like a princess in a fairy tale. We arrived at a discreet, unmarked building in the West Village. Inside, the air thrummed with music and laughter. Aunt Millie, radiant in a shimmering gown, greeted me with a hug that nearly knocked the wind out of me. Happy birthday, darling. I hope you're ready for the surprise of your life, she exclaimed, her eyes twinkling mischievously. The party was a whirlwind of champagne, canapes, and fascinating people. I met artists, musicians, even a real-life astronaut. Aunt Millie, ever the social butterfly, introduced me to everyone, regaling them with embarrassing childhood stories that made me blush crimson. As the clock struck midnight, she gathered everyone around. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, raising her glass, tonight, we celebrate my name's 21st birthday. And I have one final surprise for her. A hush fell over the room. My heart pounded with anticipation. What could it be? A diamond necklace? A trip around the world? Aunt Millie beamed. I've arranged for you to sing with. Well, I'll let him introduce himself. She gestured towards a small stage. A single spotlight illuminated a figure shrouded in shadow. The crowd gasped. My jaw dropped. It was Elvis Presley, or, at least, the most convincing Elvis impersonator I had ever seen. He swaggered onto the stage, guitar in hand, and launched into a rousing rendition of Hound Dog. The crowd went wild. I laughed, a mixture of amusement and disbelief bubbling inside me. Only Aunt Millie could pull off something like this. After the performance, the Elvis impersonator, who introduced himself as Ronnie, came over to our table. He was charming and funny, and we chatted for hours. He told me about his life, his passion for music, and his dream of making it big. I was captivated. As the party wound down, Aunt Millie winked at me. Having fun, darling? The best birthday ever, I declared. The next day, I explored the city with Ronnie. We visited Greenwich Village, where he played his guitar in Washington Square Park, drawing a small crowd. We ate pizza in Little Italy and strolled along the Brooklyn Bridge. I felt a connection with him, a spark I hadn't felt with anyone before. The rest of my trip flew by in a blur of sightseeing and late-night talks with Ronnie. I was falling for him, hard. He was everything I wasn't: spontaneous, carefree, and incredibly talented. On my last night in New York, Ronnie took me to a rooftop bar overlooking the city. The skyline twinkled like a million diamonds scattered across black velvet. He held my hand, and we talked about our dreams. Our hopes for the future. I've never met anyone like you, he said, his voice husky. You're so real. You're pretty amazing yourself, I replied, my heart fluttering. He leaned in and kissed me. It was a perfect kiss, a kiss that promised a future filled with music, laughter, and adventure. The next morning, I packed my bags, a bittersweet feeling settling over me. I was excited to go home, but I was also heartbroken to leave Ronnie. We exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch. At the airport, I checked my luggage and went through security. As I waited for my flight, I received a text message from Aunt Millie. Did you enjoy your birthday surprise? She asked. It was incredible. I replied. Especially Ronnie. Yes, Ronnie, she texted back. He's a sweet boy. He's also my son. I stared at the message, my phone slipping from my grasp. My jaw dropped. Aunt Millie's son? Ronnie was my cousin. The blood drained from my face. The kiss, the connection, the future I had imagined, it all dissolved into a swirling vortex of awkwardness and disbelief. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had fallen for my cousin. The flight home was a blur. I couldn't stop replaying every moment with Ronnie in my head, each memory now tainted with the knowledge of our familial connection. I felt foolish, naive, and utterly mortified. When I arrived home, I went straight to Aunt Millie's house. She greeted me with a warm smile and a cup of tea. So, she said, her eyes twinkling, how was New York? It was eventful, I managed to say. I'm glad you had fun, she replied. Now, about Ronnie. I braced myself for the lecture, the explanation, the inevitable I told you so. But Aunt Millie surprised me. He's adopted, she said casually, sipping her tea. He's not really your cousin. I stared at her, speechless. Adopted? Yes, darling, she said. I adopted him when he was a baby. He's not biologically related to anyone in the family. Relief washed over me, so intense it almost made me weak. I wanted to hug Aunt Millie, to thank her for the most bizarre, confusing, and ultimately wonderful birthday present I had ever received. So, I said, a smile spreading across my face, about Ronnie. Aunt Millie chuckled. I think you two have a lot to talk about.